delicate teas. "Don't forget almonds," she enjoined him as he left the room. He was to let himself out. 3. He was coming home late that night from the Sports Club, from a delectable evening which had lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning, when, just as he put the large door key into his mother's cottage, he grew aware of peculiar phenomena at the top end of Broome Street, where it runs into St. Luke's Square. And then, in the gaslit gloom of the warm summer night, he perceived a vast and vague rectangular form in slow movement towards the slope of Broome Street. It was a Pantechnicon van. But the extraordinary thing was, not that it should be a Pantechnicon van, but that it should be moving of its own accord and power, for there were no horses in front of it, and Denry saw that the double shafts had been pushed up perpendicularly, after the manner of carmen when they outspan. The Pantechnicon was running away. It had perceived the wrath to come and was fleeing. Its guardians had evidently left it imperfectly scotched or braked, and it had got loose. It proceeded down the first bit of Broome Street with a dignity worthy of its dimensions, and at the same time with apparently a certain sense of the humour of the situation. Then it seemed to be saying to itself, "Pantechnicons will be Pantechnicons." Then it took on the absurd gravity of a man who is perfectly sure that he is not drunk. Nevertheless, it kept fairly well to the middle of the road, but as though the road were a tight-rope. The rumble of it increased as it approached Denry. He withdrew the key from his mother's cottage and put it in his pocket. He was always at his finest in a crisis, and the onrush of the Pantechnicon constituted a clear crisis. Lower down, the gradient of Broome Street was more dangerous, and it was within the possibilities that people inhabiting the depths of the street might find themselves pitched out of bed by the sharp corner of a Pantechnicon that was determined to be a Pantechnicon. A Pantechnicon whose ardour is fairly aroused may be capable of surpassing deeds. Whole thoroughfares may crumble before it. As the Pantechnicon passed Denry, at the rate of about 3½ miles an hour, he leapt, or rather he scrambled, on to it, losing nothing in the process except his straw hat, which remained a witness at his mother's door that her boy had been that way and departed under unusual circumstances. Denry had the bright idea of dropping the shafts down to act as a brake, but unaccustomed to the manipulation of shafts, he was rather slow in accomplishing the deed, and ere the first pair of shafts had fallen, the Pantechnicon was doing quite 8 miles an hour, and the steepest declivity was yet to come. Further, the dropping of the left-hand shafts jerked the van to the left, and Denry dropped the other pair only just in time to avoid the sudden uprooting of a lamp-post. The 4 points of the shafts digging and prodding into the surface of the road gave the Pantechnicon something to think about for a few seconds, but unfortunately the precipitousness of the street encouraged its headlong caprices, and a few seconds later all 4 shafts were broken, and the Pantechnicon seemed to scent the open prairie. What it really did scent was the canal. Then Denry discovered the brake, and furiously struggled with the iron handle. He turned it and turned it some 40 revolutions. It seemed to have no effect. The miracle was that the Pantechnicon maintained its course in the middle of the street. Presently Denry could vaguely distinguish the wall and double wooden gates of the canal wharf. He could not jump off. The Pantechnicon was now an express, and I doubt whether he would have jumped off, even if jumping off had not been madness. His was the kind of perseverance that, for the fun of it, will perish in an attempt. The final 50 or 60 yards of Broome Street were level, and the Pantechnicon slightly abated its haste. Denry could now plainly see, in the radiance of the gas lamp, the gates of the wharf, and on them the painted letters: Shropshire Union Canal Company Limited, General Carriers. No admittance except on business. He was heading straight for those gates, and the Pantechnicon evidently had business within. It jolted over the iron guard of the weighing machine, and this jolt deflected it, so that instead of aiming at the gates, it aimed for a part of a gate and part of a brick pillar. Denry ground his teeth together and clung to his seat. The gate might have been paper, and the brick pillar a cardboard pillar. The Pantechnicon went through them as a sword will go through a ghost, and Denry was still alive. The remainder of the journey was brief and violent, owing partly to a number of bags of cement, and partly to the propinquity of the canal basin. The Pantechnicon jumped into the canal, like a mastodon, and drank. Denry, clinging to the woodwork, was submerged for a moment, but by standing on the narrow platform from which sprouted the splintered ends of the shafts, he could get his waist clear of the water. He was not a swimmer. All was still and dark, save for the faint stream of starlight on the broad bosom of the canal basin. The Pantechnicon had encountered nobody whatever en route. Of its strange escapade Denry had been the sole witness. "Well, I'm dashed," he murmured aloud. And a voice replied from the belly of the Pantechnicon, "Who is there?" All Denry's body shook. "It's me," said he. "Not Mr. Machin?" said the voice. "Yes," said he. "I jumped on it as it came down the street, and here we are." "Oh!" cried the voice. "I do wish you could get round to me." Ruth Earp's voice. He saw the truth in a moment of piercing insight. Ruth had been playing with him. She had performed a comedy for him in 2 acts. She had meant to do what is called in the Five Towns a moonlight flit. The Pantechnicon, doubtless from Birmingham, where her father was, had been brought to her door late in the evening, and was to have been filled and taken away during the night. The horses had been stabled, probably in Ruth's own yard, and while the carmen were reposing, the Pantechnicon had got off, Ruth in it. She had no money locked in her unlockable desk. Her reason for not having paid the precious Mr. Herbert Calvert was not the reason which he had advanced. His first staggered thought was, "She's got a nerve. No mistake." Her duplicity, her wickedness, did not shock him. He admired her tremendous and audacious enterprise. It appealed strongly to every cell in his brain. He felt that she and he were kindred spirits. He tried to clamber round the side of the van, so as to get to the doors at the back. But a Pantechnicon has a wheel base which forbids leaping from wheel to wheel, especially when the wheels are under water. Hence he was obliged to climb on to the roof, and so slide down on to the top of one of the doors, which was swinging loose. The feat was not simple. At last he felt the floor of the van under half a yard of water. "Where are you?" "I'm here," said Ruth, very plaintively. "I'm on a table. It was the only thing they'd put into the van before they went off to have their supper or something. Furniture removers are always like that. Haven't you got a match?" "I've got scores of matches," said Denry. "But what good do you suppose they'll be now, all soaked through?" A short silence. He noticed that she had offered no explanation of her conduct towards himself. She seemed to take it for granted that he would understand. "I'm frightfully bumped, and I believe my nose is bleeding," said Ruth, still more plaintively. "It's a good thing there was a lot of straw and sacks here." Then, after much groping, his hand touched her wet dress. "You know, you're a very naughty girl," he said. He heard a sob, a wild sob. The proud, independent creature had broken down under the stress of events. He climbed out of the water on to the part of the table which she was not occupying, and the van was as black as Erebus. Gradually, out of the welter of sobs came faint articulations, and little by little he learnt the entire story of her difficulties, her misfortunes, her struggles, and her defeats. He listened to a frank confession of guilt. But what could she do? She had meant well, but what could she do? She had been driven into a corner, and she had her father to think of. Honestly, on the previous day she had intended to pay the rent, or part of it, but there had been a disappointment, and she had been so unwell. In short... The van gave a lurch. She clutched at him, and he at her. The van was settling down for a comfortable night in the mud. Queer that it had not occurred to him before. But at the first visit she